is it?
Delivery.
Well, you're late. Leave him at the door. Yeah, who is it?
It's a pizza.
Oh, okay, leave it at the door. Who is it?
Hey, I'm bringing Merrick back from the play date.
Oh, good. Leave him at the door.
Okay.
Pizza.
Merrick really is the star of that video. Cracks me up every time. If you don't know me, I have a 4-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter. The 9:30 service, if you're ever distracted by like 2 little kids in the back, those are usually mine that's distracting you. So thank you for putting up with them all the time. But my daughter in particular, she's somebody that I would say does not lack for confidence. 2-year-old little girl has never once in her life doubted that she knows what's up. So Isla this past week, she comes down the stairs to her mom. She looks Brittany, my wife, dead in the eye, and she says this, "Mommy, I look fantastic." Okay, and why she thought she was looking fantastic is because that she's wearing this pink necklace, this like something from the dollar store type of thing. But in that moment, that pink necklace made her just feel like, I look fantastic. So not only that, she goes, "Mommy, call Daddy, tell him I look fantastic." And so I'm at work in my office, and I get a phone call from my daughter, and all of a sudden I just hear, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, I look fantastic." We're not on FaceTime. I have no idea what's going on, and so I have to ask my wife, like, what is she talking about? She's wearing this fake pink necklace. "Oh, Isla, you look beautiful. You look fantastic. It's so wonderful. I'm so proud of you." I drive home from work that day. Going through my front door, guess who's there to greet me, to once again make sure that I know that she looks fantastic. And I'll tell you, I didn't fail that day. I said she looks fantastic every single time. But wouldn't it be nice if you were confident like that? That you could walk into a room and you would feel like that about yourself. I don't know about you, but most days I do not look in the mirror and say, "Chris, you look fantastic." Most days I'm like, okay, I don't hate this, and then I move on with my day. Maybe you're like me in that way. Maybe you're more confident. Maybe you're more like my daughter. But for most days, I'm just like, man, I don't hate myself. Let's go. You know, that's what I'm doing most days. But the advantage that my daughter has, besides just not lacking in confidence, is that her worldview has been completely shaped by what I've spoken over her, what her mother has spoken over her, and what her brother has spoken over her. Because no 2-year-old, she has no concept for what the word fantastic actually means. But somebody in her life at some point said, "Hey girl, you look fantastic." And the crazy thing is that she's able to hear that and actually believe it. For me, when I hear things like that, I don't believe it naturally. I go into self-doubt, and why are you saying this to me, and what's your ulterior motive? But she hears it, she believes it, and she lives out her life in reality that way. She's not thinking, gosh, is this Daddy's way of tricking me into cleaning my room? Is this like some ulterior motive? No, she just does it and she lives it. That is absolutely incredible. And here's where I'm going with this today. That for a lot of us in this room, me being one of them, my life does not look that way. And I imagine if you're honest, your life doesn't look that way. I am a constant bag of second guessing myself and thinking, am I doing something right? Does that person like me? Did I just say something stupid? Gosh, I hate when I say something stupid. And my mind races looking for the next self-esteem boost to get me through my day. I think if we're honest here today, I think a lot of our time is spent dealing with that problem of, am I okay? And so my question for you today, I kind of said this earlier, but what if our chase, the high self-esteem, is not doing what we want it to do? It's not doing what we're hoping for. What if our self-esteem, whether good or bad, is the actual trouble? We live in a world not only that is constantly going from self-esteem to self-esteem, that just struggles to evaluate ourselves correctly. I think for a lot of us, maybe you think you do have a high self-esteem, but my question for you is, should you even have one? Because we get it wrong a lot of times. So 2 funny examples for you. There was a study done with a bunch of 13-year-old kids. And so a researcher decided, hey, I'm going to test a theory. And he grabbed kids from America and Japan and China and all different countries over the world. And he did 2 very simple things. First thing is he just asked them a simple question. Hey, are you good at math? All right? And then the next thing is like, hey, I'm actually going to give you a math test. So good news for us in this room. America, we scored number 1 in one of these 2 categories. We believe that we are good at math. We're really good at that. The bad news, we scored dead last in our ability to actually do math. You know, we love our calculators over here, so I'm going to leave it up to that. But once again, it's this moment of, is my self-identity, is my self-esteem actually rooted in the right thing? I think this one's even funnier. OkCupid is a popular dating website, and they ask a very simple question on their questionnaire. Are you a genius? Well, I think genius. I think Albert Einstein. I think people like that. Men, how many of you in this room would say that you're a genius? Better question. Wives, how many of you think that your husband would say that they are a genius? Any show of hands? Okay, there's a couple. According to OkCupid, 46% of you men are geniuses, so congratulations. We just got a bunch of Albert Einsteins in this room right now. Proud of y'all. Hey, women, don't be too excited. 30% of you think you're geniuses as well. But that reflects something for me, that my self-esteem might be an underlying issue, and it might really just be more about myself. It's really hard to navigate this world. It can be really difficult, and I'm not trying to say, hey, you shouldn't like yourself. That's not what today is about, but I'm asking you a simple question. Would your life be better if you weren't so focused on boosting your self-esteem? Is there a better path forward for us than just riding that roller coaster? Roy Baumeister is someone that spends all of his time writing about self-esteem. He's strange in that way, and he's probably done more studies or more research on the concept of self-esteem in the past 20 years than anybody else. And he's also not a Christian. He actually spends a lot of time arguing against what we believe in this room. But he concludes something about self-esteem that I would actually agree with. He says this: the enthusiastic claims of the self-esteem movement mostly range from fantasy to hogwash. A few people here and there end up worse off because their self-esteem was too low. Then again, other people end up worse off because their self-esteem was too high. And most of the time, self-esteem makes surprisingly little difference. The associations between self-esteem and its expected consequences are mixed, insignificant, or absent. So we are in a sermon series called Leave It at the Door, and as we're exploring 1 Corinthians, I think for me, something I typically would want to leave at the door is this question: is my view of myself wrong? Is it causing damage to me? Is it causing damage to those around me, whether too high or too low? Am I evaluating myself correctly? Because here's what I think culture would tell you. The best thing for your life would be to focus all your heart and attention on building your self-esteem and making sure that you view yourself in a positive manner. Once again, I'm not saying that I want you to go home thinking that you are less than. That's not the case. I'm actually going to argue something completely different. And what I'm suggesting is that today, Paul is going to give us a better path forward than that. The better path forward than just try harder to look at yourself better mentality. He's going to give us a path forward. And maybe the freedom from our issue is not that we look at ourselves more, but to look at ourselves less. That's what Paul's going to challenge us with today, that maybe my life would be better if my life was less about me and about something maybe better. So Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 21 through 23. So let no one boast in human leaders, for everything is yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, everything is yours, and you belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God. He's reminding them of their identity at that moment. He's trying to say, you belong to Jesus, so why are you boasting? Why are you acting like you don't already have something? The Corinthian church is going through so much division at this point. They are struggling to get along. This church was planted by Paul, and then he plants it, and then he leaves it. And so other leaders come in to try to help them. So that's why it's referencing Apollos or Cephas. He's saying these leaders have come in, and instead of them being like, hey, that's amazing, all of these amazing Christian leaders are coming to come help us out, they're using that as a power play. And so someone would be like, well, I was discipled by Apollos, so you should listen to my idea. I'm Team Apollos. Or someone would say, hey, I am discipled by Paul, like the St. Paul. You have heard of that guy. We should listen to my idea. They're not taking comfort in the fact that they have all these amazing Christian leaders coming through their door. They're taking pride in the fact that they know them. They're not arguing about who's right. They're arguing about who they belong to. And these issues, they're tearing the church apart. They're tearing the church of Corinth apart, and they're unable to move forward. The root cause of their problem is not Paul. It's not Apollos, it's not Cephas. Their issue is their division, and it's their pride and their boasting. It has everything to do with our human heart. It'd be easy for us to just gloss over this of like, hey, we don't have that division happening in our church. But what Paul is saying absolutely applies to you, and it absolutely applies to me. He's saying the reason we cannot get along, the reason that there's no peace in the world, and the reason we cannot live at peace with one another, and why you might not have peace with yourself, is this idea of pride and our constant comparison of ourselves to other people. We struggle with that so much. Verse 21 starts off, no more boasting, no pride, no boasting. He's saying, if you are in Jesus, then why in the world are you focusing on this? And he's saying, you need to think less of yourself and more of him. We are after that trait of humility. That's what Paul's trying to get us to. And notice what Paul doesn't do. He doesn't flash his accolades. He doesn't say, hey, I am Paul. I am a big deal. I am the church leader. I did establish this church. I planted a lot of churches. I've led so many people to Jesus. In fact, Jesus thinks I'm such a big deal that he came and talked to me after he was resurrected and not you. He doesn't do that. He's not flashing his accolades. He's not boasting in that. And what he's going to try to get us to see is that there is a better long-term solution than my life being all about me. It's really easy for my life to become all about me. It's really easy for me to want to flash my accolades and say, this is all that Chris has accomplished. But what Paul is trying to get me to, and what he's trying to get you to this morning, is that there is a better way forward for us. Chapter 4, starting in verse 1, says this. A person should think of us in this way, as servants of Christ and as managers of the mystery of God. Once again, Paul's saying our goal, our aim is not to elevate ourselves, but to elevate Jesus. And in this regard, it is required that managers be found faithful. It is of little importance to me that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself, for I am not conscious of anything against myself, and I am not justified by this. It is the Lord who judges me. Remember those two verses. So don't judge anything prematurely before the Lord comes, who will both bring to light what is hidden in darkness and reveal intentions of the heart. And then praise will come to each one from God. Now, brothers and sisters, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, so that you may learn from us the meaning of the saying, nothing beyond what is written. The purpose is that none of you will be arrogant, favoring one person over another. And then he's going to remind us again, who makes you so superior? What do you have that you didn't receive? If in fact you did receive it, why do you boast as if you hadn't received it? He's saying, why in the world are you so proud and acting like you're so much better when we all have Jesus together? And in verse 6, Paul is urging the Corinthians to have no more pride, no more arrogance over one another. I think this is nothing new for us. We know that pride is kind of a bad word. It's not something that we should be chasing after. But this word in particular that Paul is using is this idea to be overinflated or swollen. So Paul is trying to teach these Corinthians that something about our identity can be inflated or it can be swollen. And so imagine if you've seen the movie Willy Wonka, right? So character Violet, she eats the chewing gum when she's not supposed to. That's supposed to be a 3-course meal. And at the very end, it's blueberry pie, and then she becomes a big giant blueberry, right? So have that mental picture in your mind. That is the word, and that's the idea that Paul is trying to get us to understand, that our pride has so much air, it is so overinflated that we at any moment are ready to burst. That's how our identity can feel. And so what's the danger of viewing myself in the wrong way? That I'm going to be on a constant self-esteem roller coaster, and I'm going to be oscillating from an overinflated sense of self to a deflated sense of self. I'm going to be look at how great I am, to asking the question, am I even great? It's going to be painful, and it's going to make me insanely busy, and I'm going to be utterly fragile. Have you ever woken up and thought to yourself, hey, my toes feel great today? Has anyone ever done that before? Or has anyone ever woken up and you're just thinking to yourself, like, man, my elbows, like, they are just like feeling phenomenal. I'm feeling good about it. The only reason why you maybe have thought about that is probably because at one point in your life, your toes did hurt or your elbows did hurt. If you asked me, Chris, what are you noticing today? I would tell you I'm noticing my lower back, because yesterday my 4-year-old son yelled cannonball, ran, and jumped directly on it. That's what I'm noticing today. Our body is designed in this way, that we only notice the things that are wrong with it. So when my toes are hurting, I actually recognize my toes. But for most days, day in and day out, I don't notice my toes. Our ego often hurts. Our pride often hurts. My identity gets rattled, and that is because it has something wrong with it. And is always drawing attention to itself. Every single day, I'm thinking about how do I look? How am I treated? What should I do next? And people sometimes say their feelings are hurt. And what they really mean is this, is that my identity, my sense of self is completely thrown off. And most of the time, our identity is busy making us do two things. It's making us compare and boast. And you can see this in verse 6. It says, the purpose is that none of you will be arrogant. And he doesn't stop there. He says, favoring one person over another. I try to fill my emptiness and deal with my discomfort by comparing myself to people all the time. I can just be honest with you today. You don't have to feel bad that you might be also in that camp. Sometimes we are only proud of being more successful, more intelligent, or more good looking than the next person. And then I'm in a room where someone is better at my job than me. And that makes me feel insecure. There's times where I'm around parents where I go, man, I wish I could be a dad like you. And that makes me feel insecure. And what's happening there is that my pride is the pleasure of being more than the next person. And so I go from that person, I go away, and I try to find someone that makes me feel better. My pride is constantly making me work on my resume. It's constantly making me look at my identity and say, am I measuring up? In high school, some of you might have done some things in some clubs that you really didn't enjoy doing. And the reason why you did them is because you wanted to put it on your college application. Is there any proud members of the Key Club in here? Any former Key Club members? Okay, I was a Key Club member, I guess, my sophomore year of high school. I was a proud fighting member of the Key Club. I went to 5 meetings. I don't know what Key Club actually does today, so don't ask me. I don't know. I think we were supposed to help people. But the only reason why I even thought to do that was that I wanted to put it on my college resume, but I don't actually think it made it on to my college resume. But that's what our egos and our identity are doing all the time. It's doing all kinds of things, not for the pleasure of doing them, but because I'm trying to put together a resume to make myself feel better. I'm comparing myself to other people. I'm trying to make myself look better than others. I'm creating a self-esteem resume. So today, what is your ego, what is your identity lying to you about? And what are the ways you are trying to convince your identity? What lies are you believing and or telling yourself? Because our ego, my identity, when not rooted in something beyond me, it is painful and it is busy and it is fragile. And what Paul is saying is that's the state of the normal human self. It's what he's talking to these people in Corinth. Paul is trying to say, hey, your identity was never supposed to be rooted in these accomplishments. It was never supposed to be rooted in me. It was never supposed to be rooted in Apollos. It was never supposed to be rooted in anything besides Jesus. And there is a better way forward for us. There's a better way forward for you this morning. I know for me that so often my identity is tied to anything but Jesus. And Paul's going to remind us a better way forward. And he says this, starting in verses 3 and 4. It says this, it is of little importance to me that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself, for I am not conscious of anything against myself, but I am not justified by this. It is the Lord who judges me. He shows them how the gospel has transformed his sense of self-worth, his sense of self-regard, and his identity. His ego operates in a completely different way now. When you see the word judge here, you need to think of the idea of the word verdict. It is that stamp of approval that you and we are chasing all the time. And Paul is saying here, I am not looking to this church at Corinth for the verdict that he is a somebody. Paul is saying, I care about you deeply, and yet I do not find my identity in you. I care deeply about a lot of things, and I so easily find my identity in them. I care deeply about being a good dad. I want to be a good dad so bad. And when things are going well, man, I can be puffed up and proud of that. But when things aren't going well, I can feel so deflated and feel such like a failure that I am not good. I love my job. Working here is amazing. It's one of the best things about my life. And I so badly want to be a good worker here. Some days, man, that inflates me and it puffs me up. And then there's other days where things don't go well and I just feel like a failure. What Paul is saying is, I don't care what you think. I don't care what anybody thinks. Paul's self-worth, his self-regard, his identity is not tied in any way to their verdict and their evaluation of him. That's amazing. Wouldn't that be a better life for us, that if I could live in that way where my identity is not rooted in the verdicts that are spoken over me and my evaluation of the world and myself? Paul's identity might not be tied to other people's opinion of him, but if I'm honest, man, mine is all the time. I think if you were honest today, even though that so many of us are in Christ already, I think it's so easy to fall into the trap to make my identity about anything outside of Jesus. So how do we reach the point where I'm not being controlled by what people think about us? How do you think we get there? Culture would say this: the antidote to your self-esteem issues is just to have a better version and a better view of yourself. That your low self-esteem is solved by just thinking that you are a better person. But Paul flips it and says it's not only about comparison, but he even goes on to say it's not even about what I think about myself. So what would Paul say to us that are chasing this self-esteem game? What are the things that he would point us to? He would say it is a trap. It's a trap to say that we should not worry about everyone else's standards. We just need to set our own, because that's not really an answer either. Boosting my self-esteem by living up to my own standard or someone else's standard might sound like a good thing, but it's not going to deliver. It can't deliver. I'm not always going to live up to my family's standards, and that has the potential to make me feel terrible. I can sometimes not live up to my parents' standards, sorry, mom and dad, but that can sometimes make me feel terrible. I can sometimes not live up to your standards, and the temptation is that can make me feel terrible. I can't live up to society's standards, and that can sometimes make me feel terrible. So the solution must be that I need to set my own standards. The truth is I can't keep those either, and that makes me feel terrible. Unless I set incredibly low standards for myself, and then I'm probably going to feel terrible for being that type of person. Trying to boost my self-esteem by trying to live up to my own standards or somebody else's is a trap. If you are trying to do that, Paul is going to say there is a better way. Paul is saying, I do not look at this church that I established as a basis for my identity. He is not going to them for a verdict to say that he is a somebody. He's not getting his sense of self or identity from them. Remember who Paul is. Paul is one of the most influential people in the history of the world. He's incredible. He just moved forward and nothing fazed the guy. And he's saying, I'm not finding my identity in that. In fact, he even says this in 1 Timothy 1. He claims, Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and I am the worst of them. Not one of the not so good ones, but the worst. Paul is saying that he knows about his struggles, but he doesn't connect that to himself and his identity. He's not saying that my past sins are my identity now, and he's not even saying all these amazing things are my identity now. He's saying there's a better way forward. And there's times when you and we let our past mistakes just cripple us. And it's the cycle we go down. Well, I made this mistake, so this must be who I am now. And Paul says, hey, I made those mistakes, and it has absolutely no standing on who I am and who I will be. Although he calls himself to be the worst of sinners, that fact is not going to stop him from doing the things that he is called to do. He is moving forward, and he is not defined by his identity. Church, what are you needing to move forward from? I want to live a life more like Paul. Doesn't that sound freeing? If I think of all my sins and I just write them out, that could kill my confidence. If I think of myself as someone filled with anger and greed and pride and all these things that Paul says he is filled with, I am done, because what am I doing? I am making myself the judge and jury of my life, and my identity is never going to be okay with that. Paul is in a completely different territory. His ego is not overinflated like ours can be. It's just filled up. And Paul is saying that his identity is working just like his toes. That he's at the point where he's not thinking about himself anymore. And that's the key for you and me right there. That our identity is made complete when my time and energy is not focused on me. And that's being a follower of Jesus. That's gospel humility, the ability to not need to think about myself. Not needing to connect things back to Chris. And it's the freedom of self-forgetfulness. That I can stop thinking about myself because of what Jesus Christ has done for me. Wouldn't that be nice? to not have to think about yourself. This is totally unique. Are we talking about high self-esteem? No. Are we talking about low self-esteem? No, it's not about self-esteem. That's what Paul is trying to get us to realize. He's refusing to play that game. He says, I don't care about your opinion, but I don't really care that much about my opinion, and that is the secret for us. A follower of Jesus, a truly gospel-humble person, is not a self-hating person. He's not a self-loving person, but a self-forgetful person whose egos is just like his toes. It just works. It's not drawing attention to itself. Our toes should just work. Our identity should just work. And the more that I get to understand what Jesus has done, and the more that you get to understand what Jesus has done, that should motivate us to change, that should motivate us to want to change. Wouldn't it be nice to be the type of person who does not need recognition, but is also not afraid of it? Wouldn't it be nice to be the type of person who's not sitting around reliving all their past glories to make myself feel like I am awesome, or just trying to convince myself that I am? Or maybe you're the type of person that beats yourself up and you're tormented by regrets. Wouldn't you want to be free of them? And that is the possibility for you and me. If you keep on going where Paul is going, you can actually enjoy things for what they all are and not just do them for your resume. So how did Paul get to this point? How did he get to this point of forgetting himself? He tells us. He says, I don't look at the church for a verdict. I don't look at myself for a verdict. But he says this, for I am not conscious of anything against myself, but I am not justified by this. Or another, I am not innocent. Remember, he's the worst of sinners. What Paul is looking for, and what I think we're all looking for, is an ultimate verdict that we are important, that we are valuable, and that we have a purpose. And I walk around my life seeking that out. And every single day, I have this habit of putting myself in a courtroom. He's saying the problem with self-esteem, whether it is too high or is too low, is that every single day I am putting myself in a courtroom and I'm putting myself on trial. So in a courtroom, you have a prosecution and you have a defense. And everything I'm doing is either providing, in my mind, a defense for the prosecution or evidence for the defense. And there are some days where I feel like I am crushing it. And I feel like the defense has the case to win it. And I'm being a good dad. I'm being a good worker. I'm doing all the right things. I even called my brother. Like, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. And there's some days that I feel like the prosecution has me dead to rights. That I'm losing it, that, man, I was short with my kids, and I wasn't kind to my wife, and I wasn't good at work, and I didn't call my brother, and I didn't do the things that I know that I should do. And what Paul's going to say to you, and he's going to say to me, is that he has found the secret. And he's saying that he took the deal. Paul's not in the trial anymore. He's out of the courtroom. He's gone. He's over by the hot dog stand because a better verdict is in, and our ultimate verdict is in. Paul puts it really simply. He knows that they cannot justify him, and he knows that he cannot justify himself. And so what does he say? It is the Lord, it is God, it's Jesus who judges me, and that is the only opinion that counts. Do you realize that what we believe in this place, that putting our trust in Jesus, that we get the verdict before you even have to perform? My issue, I think for a lot of us, your issue is that I keep putting myself back in the courtroom when Jesus took me out long ago. That's my problem. I think that's your problem a lot of times. Paul is saying this, that in Jesus, the verdict leads to performance. It's not our performance that leads to the verdict. The moment that we believe in Jesus, God says, this is my beloved son or daughter in whom I am well pleased, or as Romans 8:1 says, therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. The moment we believe, God assigns what Christ did for us onto us and says that we now are family. In other words, God looks at you and says, just as he once said to Jesus at his baptism, you are my son, you are my daughter, I love you and I am pleased with you. You see, the verdict is in. And now I don't have to perform on the basis of the verdict. I can just do things because he loves me and he accepts me, and I don't have to do things to build up my resume. I get to do things just because he loves me. I don't have to do things to make myself look good. I can do them for the joy of doing them. Paul's answer to you, man, if you want a better life, he's saying, get out of the courtroom. You're not on trial, because Jesus went on trial for us instead. Jesus went into the courtroom. He was on trial. He was struck. He was beaten. He was put to death. Why? Because he wanted to free us from the trials that we deserve. So I don't have to go through trials anymore. I mean, I just get to look at God and say, accept me because of what Jesus has done. And now the only person whose opinion should matter looks at me and says, he's valuable and he's worthy. My fear for you, my fear for me is this. And when I think of how God looks at me, I don't always think that he looks at me as a beloved son. So take a second. If I were to ask you, what does God think of you? And if I were to ask you, what face is he making when he thinks of your name, what is that face? I think for a lot of us in this room, he would be, in our minds, frowning. Or he would be giving an apathetic shrug, or he maybe would be looking away, or that he would be shaking his head, or he would just look disappointed, or maybe you even worry that he would just say, who? But the truth is that if we are in Jesus, the only thing that he looks at us, and the only way that he looks at us is just absolutely delighted, that his face is pure joy when he thinks of your name, when he thinks of my name. Sure, he might be saddened by our circumstances, and he might be disappointed about our sins, but that's not how we are judged anymore. We have a new identity, and I would argue that God looks at you and says that you look fantastic. Our identity and our sins, they're not together. But we live a life where we keep trying over and over and over again to put them together. When you forget yourself and you walk into self-forgetfulness, that just takes you completely out of the courtroom. The trial is over, the verdict is in. I know for a lot of us that in here that believe in Jesus, and we already are walking with him, but we struggle finding ourselves walking back into that courtroom every day. You don't feel like you're living like Paul says, you're getting sucked back in. And all I can say for you this morning is that you have to relive the gospel every day. You have to relive the gospel every time you pray. You have to press into Jesus every time you come here on a Sunday. You have to relive the gospel when you're going through trials and when you're going through difficulties. And you need to ask yourself, why the heck am I still in the courtroom? We shouldn't be there. Your deal has already been made. And man, that takes time. And it takes the effort to slow down when I'm feeling that temptation, when I feel despair, when I feel like my identity is caving in, that I take a moment and I breathe and I look to who Jesus is. When I mess up, I remind myself of the grace of God. But whether it's Paul, who persecuted Christians, or Matthew, who turned on his people, or Peter, who acted as if he never knew Jesus, or Jonah, who literally ran from God, or Moses, who was a murderer, or David, who was an adulterer and a murderer, or me, who can be arrogant and prideful and a liar, the scriptures are filled with sinners who are not defined by their mistakes and walked into the grace of God, into self-forgetfulness. You have that ability to today. I promise you do. And if you feel like you've messed up too much, you're wrong. You were never meant to carry the pressure of your identity alone. Your world was never meant to be all about you. Your self-esteem was never meant to be all about you, but about the King who came for you. Like Paul, we can say, I don't care what you think. I don't even care what I think. I only care about what the Lord thinks. And he has said, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, and you are my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. Live your life out of that. Would y'all pray with me? Father, I do pray, and I pray that we would see you in that light and that we would not feel the temptation to make my identity and to make my life all about myself, but we would recognize that, Lord, there is a better way forward. And Father, that I wouldn't be drowned out by my mistakes, and I wouldn't be pressing into the wrong things, but I would recognize that you are good, that you love us, and that you go before us. Father, I pray as we deal with our weeks and as we deal with the trials that are going to come our way and as we deal with the struggles that we have, that we wouldn't forget that you are a God that loves us, that you care for us, that you are not judging us by our past mistakes. You're not judging me on my performance because, Lord, you've already done it. You sent Jesus for us and you took care of us in a way that we never could on our own. And so, Lord, I just pray. I pray if anyone in this room is struggling to believe that truth, that they're struggling to believe that you are a good Father that does not look at them for their mistakes, that you would reveal yourself in a powerful way and you would change their mind and you would make sure that they know that you love them, that you care about them, that you're for them. And Father, that we would walk as a group of people that do have a new purpose, that do have a new identity, and that we would recognize all the value that you've bestowed on us. Lord, you are so good. And we love you so much, and we just pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.